Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, I want to talk about what I consider and many consider to be the most neglected and unloved school in all of Wizard101, and that is Myth. Now, I just want to start off by saying this video comes from a place of love, not a place of hate. I love the Myth school and it has been my main for the last 5 to 10 years, and usually when I quest through the game, my Myth is the first one I use every time. So don't go into this video thinking that I'm just going to be hating on Myth for the next 10 to 15 minutes. That is not the case. I love this school, and really this comes from a place of me wanting KingsIsle to buff the school and focus on it rather than just continuing to neglect it. Now, I use that word again, and you may be asking, neglect? Well, first off, let's talk about why Myth is unloved and then talk about how I think they're getting neglected. The unloved adjective comes from the fact that generally Myth is the least popular school in Wizard101. You may have noticed that on console version, the most popular school is Death, followed by probably Life and Storm, about even, and then every other school's after that, but you almost never see a Myth in the wild. It is very rare to see a Myth walking around because honestly, they are the least popular school in this game, and it's not even really a contest. The only other school I would say is maybe as unpopular would be Ice, and even then, I still think that they're more popular than the Myth school. Now, where does neglected come from? The reason why they're unloved so much is because KingsIsle doesn't really give Myth its time in the light that they give every other school. Every other school has something about them that makes them unique and interesting, except really Myth. So that brings us to our next topic. Let's talk about gimmicks of schools. And you may be asking, gimmicks of schools? What do you mean by that? Well, every school has something about them that makes them unique and interesting. Fire has damage over time spells. Ice has shields. Storm really just kind of hits things very hard. Life has the ability to heal. Death has heal back spells. And then Balance has a lot of blades that any school can use. Myth has 3 main gimmicks. However, all of them kind of suck. Well, I want to talk about those 3 gimmicks individually, one at a time. I kind of want to talk about why they suck, and then I want to talk about how I think KingsIsle could fix it. Because realistically, I think Myth is just on the precipice of being one of the most loved and interesting schools in this game, but it's just barely missing that mark, and it's falling so hard because of that. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with Myth's first gimmick and the most obvious one that most people know, and that is minions. Now, Myth has the ability to summon minions to fight for them in battle. They have many spells that allow them to do this, such as Golem minion. They have Cyclops minion. They have Troll minion. In Avalon, they get another tier 5 minion spell, like Talos. They have the ability to summon things to fight for them, and on top of that, they have the ability to use different spells on those minions that give them different things. For example, Shield minion will put a shield on the minion. You have Buff minion, which will give them a blade. You have Siphon health, which will sacrifice a minion for health. They have many different options that can interact with those minions in an interesting way. The second gimmick that Myth has is the ability to stun things. Now, I feel like this one's less obvious, but Myth does tend to get stunning spells more than every other school in this game. That's not to say the other schools don't get stuns, but Myth really specializes in them. So they have stun, they have a mass stun that will stun every enemy, blinding light, and then the real kicker is they have Medusa, which will stun for 2 rounds, and that can be insanely useful where it's 2 rounds where the enemy isn't able to do literally anything. So generally, that is Myth's second kind of gimmick compared to every other school, is they have stuns, and they even have stuns that last longer. Myth's third gimmick, and one that I feel like is the least obvious but is probably their best gimmick out of the 3, is the ability to remove shields and go through shields. Removing shields is the more obvious one. They have Pierce and Shatter, which is really good for cheating bosses and bosses that spam shields. So Yevgeny, the main way to defeat Yevgeny is to use Shatter on him right before hitting him, and then there are bosses that have minus 90 shields that if you use Pierce on will remove the shield as a whole. On top of that, Myth back in the day used to have more, but now they have a little bit less, but they still have them, is spells that will hit and then hit again. So Minotaur, for example, does 50 damage and then it does 445. So it will remove all of the shields with the first hit and then hit again for a second bigger hit that won't have the shields blocking it. So that allows Myth to really negate shields as a whole. And that, I would say, is Myth's 3 main gimmicks. We have minions, we have stuns, and we have the ability to remove shields. Now, of those, I want you to take a second and think about which one do you think is the most useful, and which one do you think is what you're going to be using as a myth? Well, if you answered that really not any of them, but I guess the shield removal one, you'd be absolutely correct, because the first two kind of suck, and then shield removal is useful, but you only use it in very specific situations that don't come up more than maybe once or twice a world. So let's talk about why myths gimmicks as a whole kind of suck. So starting off with minions have a few main weaknesses that really hold them back from potentially being incredibly good. The first one and the most obvious one is that you cannot control them at all in battle. Now, different minions have different combat behaviors slightly. They have different decks that they use and generally different combat behaviors, which means that some will blade you more, some will attack more, and it's kind of up to you to decide which ones you want to summon in that moment. The problem with this is 99% of them are going to be useless after Arc 1 anyway. While in Arc 1 you can summon a minion and it will buy you time and take some of the heat off of you, after Arc 1, when do you really think summoning a minion is going to be useful? It's almost never going to be useful because most of them don't really have the health to stand up to an enemy anyway. They'll just be so squishy to the point that they'll just be one shot and die anyway. In terms of Myth's minion utility spells, almost none of them are useful at all, because like blading a minion, when is that going to be useful? Because minions aren't going to be doing any form of damage past Arc 1 anyway, because they don't have the ability to use enchants, so they're not going to be doing any damage. Sacrificing a minion for 400 health, when's that going to help you past Arc 1? Probably never. Maybe sacrificing a minion for 2 pips can be useful, but like, I don't know. I don't think that's ever going to come into play in a battle. So as a whole, Myth's minions are just pretty much useless. Stunning has a whole other set of issues. If you haven't noticed yet, for some reason in this game, every boss enemy has complete stun immunity. And I'm not talking about stun resistance. Like, it's not a chance that they won't be stunned. They have immunity. There is an 100% chance every boss enemy from Arc 1 all the way up to Arc 4 is going to resist your stun. It's not even a chance. They just will resist it. Now, I'm not sure about in console. I think in console it's probably like PC, but on PC, they kind of soft changed it. So every Arc 1 boss also doesn't have the ability to stun. It used to be like Arc 2 bosses and later, but they changed it so Arc 1 bosses can't be stunned either. And it's just so dumb. I think what I understand, and someone commented this on a video I made about stunning. If you want like a full breakdown of stunning as a whole, watch the video I made like 8 months ago, like stunning is useless in Wizard 101. Someone commented the fact that KingsIsle considers stunning to be too broken, which immediately I just laugh at, because let's be honest, in PvE, it's already stupid easy anyway. So the idea that you're just removing one of the features of the game because you consider it too easy when everyone just spams AoEs anyway is just so stupid. So if that is the case, whatever KingsIsle dev did that, you need like a mental evaluation or something, because that's insane. I really can't think of any other reason why stunning wouldn't work other than they consider it unfair for the AI. And I just think it's so funny because right now this game's in a state where it gets boring because of how repetitive the combat is and because there's no real reason to use anything other than AoE attack spells. And I think it's funny because the other features of the game, like stunning, there's no reason to use them, and in some cases they don't even allow you to use them. Like, stunning is just not a thing in PvE. Like, you don't stun enemies except for maybe mob enemies, but why would you stun mob enemies? Like, you should just AoE them anyway. So stunning is useless. Now finally, out of Myth's main gimmicks is the shield removal, and I kind of already hinted at this earlier, I believe. When do you use shield removal except for maybe 1 or 2 times throughout a world? The answer is kind of never. Like, unless there's a boss that has a very specific cheat where they are spamming shields, you're not going to be using that shield removal ability. And what this kind of means is that all 3 of Myth's main gimmicks are pretty much useless. Now, once again, I want to loop back to what I talked about in the start, where I talked about how each school has a gimmick. Think of like Death, for example. When you're using heal back spells, think of how good that is and how Death is the most broken school because of that. For Fire, think about how you use damage over times for almost all of your spells, and you can use Detonate to do a ton of damage. Life uses heals all the time. The only other school I would consider to have a gimmick that might be considered a little useless would be Ice with their shields, and even then I think it's still more useful than where Myth is currently. So just taking it back for a second, looking at it completely, Myth as a whole has 3 main gimmicks. All of them are pretty much useless. Myth is the least popular school in the game because it doesn't have a useful gimmick. Where does that leave Myth as a whole? Well, Myth in this game is kind of whole identity at max level right now is that it is a spirit version of fire. What I mean by that is that it is probably the second best hitter in the game, tied with fire after storm, and it doesn't have anything else beyond that. Myth's entire purpose is basically to blade and hit, and it doesn't have any real utility it can use, unlike the other schools. Like, fire has damage over times to make it interesting, and storm just has massive damage. So it means that realistically, Myth is like a third place and maybe even a fourth place if you consider death to be better, which most people do. So Myth is kind of just a placeholder school. And that means that beyond like just looks, like if you like how the spells look, there's no real reason to pick Myth. So how would I fix this? I think that this is really the easiest fix you could possibly do in the game. You just make their spells better. Make it so that minions have more health, or make more minions that cost more pips and have the ability to summon them. While we have Monstrology, it is so poorly integrated into the game and into Myth's kind of main repertoire to the point where nobody uses it anyway. So it kind of means that like summoning things you almost never do, especially later game, because you don't want them to take your feints, so that's just useless anyway. What I would do for minions is probably make it so that you can either directly control the minion, directly influence what spells they do, or just simply have like a combat toggle like other MMOs have. For example, Star Wars The Old Republic is the first one I think of. They have a damage, a tank, and a healing toggle on all of your companions that you can click on and change what they do in combat. It would be probably really easy to add something like that to just make it so that, you know, your minion only hits or only blades you. You get my point. Make it so that they can only use a specific type of spell, and that would immediately make minions more useful. In terms of stunning, it's so easy to just remove stun immunity and maybe make it into stun resist instead on every boss in the game. I still don't know why KingsIsle has it so that every boss in the game is stun immune. It means that an entire feature of combat is completely useless. And then finally, I honestly think that their shield removal is in a good place anyway. It's just that it doesn't come up in battle, which means that while it's probably their best gimmick, it's not like extraordinarily useful, and it's the reason why you don't see a ton of myths, because while the shield removal is useful, it's not useful enough that you need a myth, right? Whereas every other school, their gimmick is super useful. Shield removal is just kind of like, it's okay, it's decent enough. So I think that kind of wraps up this video. I talked about their gimmicks, I talked about why they're useless, and I talked about how they could make them useful. I just really want to finish off this video by saying I love the Myth School, and again, it is my main. It hurts the fact that the reason why Myth is so unloved is because they're really neglected by KingsIsle. KingsIsle has opted to make it so that Myth's main drawing points are all things that are pretty useless in this game. So it makes Myth feel all that much worse, and it means that most people aren't gonna pick Myth. So I hope you enjoyed, and I want you guys to leave in the comments, you know, your opinions on Myth and like what you think about it. I just think it kind of sucks, you know. It sucks that my favorite school in this game is kind of the least useful school in the entire game. So I think that's it for today. If you enjoyed, if you agree, drop a like at the sub button. If you don't agree, you know, let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear your opinions as well. But otherwise, I think that's it for today. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next episode. Have a fantastic day.